Good. Hello, students. So this lab, I'll be taking you through your forecasting lab, right? So for this lab, we're gonna be using Excel QM V4, right? This one here, right? So as you just do, just click on it, right? And then it's gonna load onto your Excel. Then you're gonna get something like this, right? And then you're gonna enable macros. Right, yeah, okay. So after it's downloading, you should get something like this in one of your tabs on the taskbar, right? So now in this lab, as I said, we're going to be doing forecasting, right? So let's say we're trying to forecast. Yes, so let's say we're trying to forecast like demand, right? So now I know in class you have done like the different kinds of forecasting methods. I think you have done three moving averages, weighted moving averages, exponential smoothing, and then you've also done exponential smoothing with with trend adjustment, and then you've also done linear regression, right? So, but in the workplace, you'll have to be able to do this more efficient, right? So now I'll show you how to do forecasting using a tool, right? So the principles are still the same, right? Nothing has changed. Just now we're doing it on a software, right? So, okay. So let's say like in your data, right? Let's say they're saying you should do a 2-year moving average, right? Which means you should average the two periods, right? Which means your next period is gonna start here going down, right? Something like that. Similar to weighted moving average where you assign weights and then you calculate your weight, right? And then yeah. So now, okay, so now we're gonna start, right? So now, like let's say you are given the sales data, right? So let's say it's in months, right? So it's in months, right? So now, like, let's say, yeah, these are from month one up until month 48. So, like, be mindful that this can be given in like January, February, March, yeah, something like that. Or it's the number of periods, right? So this is up to 48 months, right? Which is approximately like 4 years, right? 48, yeah, for 48 months, it's 4 years. So I think so. So now let's say like they're saying like forecast using like, so I'll be using like something like this guide, right? So let's say one, so here they're saying do it times series using the 3-month moving average, right? So now using the 3-month moving average, right? Which means we'll average the 3 months, right? So what you do is that you select your data. So yeah, you select all of your data, right? And then you go to Excel QM here, right? And then after you go to Excel QM, you go to here, right? You can go to alphabetical or by chapter, doesn't matter. And then after then you go to forecasting, right? And then you select the 3 month, the moving average. So, right. After you select the moving average, you'll get something like this, right? So here, number of periods of past data, right? This is the total number of periods, right, that you are trying to forecast with, right? So here we have a total of 48 periods, right? Which means our number of past period data is going to be 48, right? And then, so here you are choosing whether to name what to name the period, right? So we'll just leave it as period, right? So the first period, for example, is gonna the software is gonna name it period one, period two, up until period 48, right? So it's fine, doesn't matter, right? So now here, number of periods to average, right? So since from here, as you can see, they're saying we average using a 3-month moving average, right? So our average period is gonna be 3, right? So it's right 3 here, and then we press OK, right? And then analysis is conducted, right? From when analysis is conducted, you get your output values, right, for your forecast, right? And then you get your forecast graph, right? So this forecast graph, it's for the 3-month moving average, right? And then from then on, I want you to name this sheet like, so you just double click on the sheet, right? And then you say, wait, So you're gonna say something like graph for moving average, right? And then here you're also gonna name this like the what you call, you're gonna name this like the, can I put this analysis, can name it analysis or 3 month moving average, right? So I know which analysis is for what, right? And then from here, right? So here, let's say if you made a mistake, like with your averaging periods, right? You can modify it here, right? So now let's say you want to increase to 4, right? You just, as you can see, you just scroll on this tab, right? So you can adjust them and then automatically adjust on the software, right? So we're gonna go back to 3, right? And then this is our forecast, right? So in our analysis, right, we get the next period, right? And then we get, so this is the next forecasted period, right? And then we get the average, right? So the average, it's the, what you call, no, not, sorry, not the average. You get these values like the bias, the MAD, the MSE, the MAP, and then your SE, which is the mean absolute deviation, mean square error, mean absolute percentage error, and sum of square errors, right? So like for, so initially, right, you don't know which forecast, like for a particular company or a particular data is gonna work, right? So you have to do all of the forecasts, right? And then depending on this matrix, right? So your MAD, MSE, MAPE, and your SE, right? You determine which forecast is superior, right? So which means in this case, now we have to do the time series for, we have to do the time series for the moving average, weighted moving average, yeah, and all of the other forecasts, right? And then the one that gives us like the best forecasting, right? It's the most accurate one, right? So now moving on, right? We do our weighted moving average, right? So if we go back here, right? So um, okay. So now here, okay. So, okay, yeah. So that's fine. So let's say now we're doing weighted moving average, right? So our data, all of our data again, it has to be selected, right? And then we go to Excel QM and then we say alphabetical, right? And then we go to forecasting again, right? And then we get this. And then this time we're going to select the weighted moving average, right? So again, the number of period of past data is the total number of data that you are using to forecast, right? Which in this case, it's 48, right? Since we have 48 periods, right? And then number of periods to average, right? So since even in a weighted moving average, you have periods to average. Let's say we're averaging 3, right? So just press OK, right? So now you're gonna get like the analysis for the weighted moving average, and you're gonna get your graph, right? So this is your graph for weighted moving average, right? So now, what you're gonna do now is that since weighted moving average, you assign weight to each period, right? So, like they may say, like for the first period, right, or yeah, the first period has a weight of, let's say, 0.5, right? So you put this as 0.5, right? And then, so like since the weights have to add up to 1, right? You have to always make sure that they add up to 1, right? So let's say the same period, they say it has a weight of 0.3, right? And then that period, obviously, it has to have a weight of 0.2, right? So this is how you add your weights to the weighted moving average, right? So now it will assign these weights like to, so this is the most recent one, the other one, second one, and then the third one, right? So this is how you do your weighted moving average. And similarly, you get your forecast for the next period, which is period number 49, and then you get your values that you can use to compare the accuracy of the forecast, right? And then you also get your graph, right? So similarly, like I'd like you to name like these graphs here under sheets, stating what the graph is for, because this is not clearly like labeled, right? So I'd like you to, even for here, right? So even for here, right, I'd like you to indicate this So you can say forecast using 3-month weighted moving average, right? So yeah, something like this, right? And then you label your y-axis as well as demands. Yeah, it is demand. So you just double click and then you label it as demand, and then you label this other side as the number of periods, right? Of periods, let's say in months, right? Yeah, something like this, right? So you label your graph, all of your graphs, you have to make sure that they are labeled. And then sorry, you also make sure that you label your sheet by stating here, this is the graph for the 3-month weighted moving average, right? And then now moving on, right? You're gonna go to our next graph, right? So you're gonna go to make sure our data is selected, and then you're gonna go to by alphabetical, right? And then we're gonna go to forecasting, right? So now let's say we're doing exponential smoothing, right? So now even with exponential smoothing, right, we have to so now like we're using our exponential smoothing, right? So now we go to alphabet, right? Then we go to forecasting, right, with exponential smoothing, right? So now number of periods of past data like still remains consistent. It's gonna be 48 since we have 48 periods of the past data, right? And then press OK, right? So after we press OK, right? If you still remember the formula for exponential smoothing, we have to have an alpha value, right? So from that alpha value, right, depending on what they give you as the alpha value, this is where you put that alpha value, right? So the alpha value, for example, it's gonna be, let's say if it's 0.7, so when I come here, right? So this here under alpha, and then you're gonna put it as 0.7, right? Yeah. So now, as you can see, like for your period, like it assumes the first value as the first forecast, so it can do the forecast for the rest, right? So now also like when you do your analysis here, you get your next period, right? And then you get your values like this, right? And then you also get your forecasting graph, right? So for here, I'd also like you to label that this is a graph for like exponential using exponential smoothing, and I'd also like you to label your axis like this and this. I'm not gonna do it on this video, but for you guys, you should be able to do it on your own, right? And then yeah, and then you get your values that you use to compare forecast, and then you get your forecast for period number 49, right? And then now you do your next forecast, right, which is your go to forecast, right? And then now you do your exponential smoothing with trend adjusted, right? So now still your past periods of data is going to be 48, and then this is your trend adjusted with forecasting, right? So now let's say here, right, they say your alpha value is 0.4, right, and your beta value is 0.5, right? So let's say which means you want to put your alpha value here as 0.4, right, and then your beta value is 0.5, right? And then one important thing that you have to be mindful of here, they said like the first value for focus to product one is gonna be 0 point, it's gonna be 0 point, what you call, it's gonna be 5,000, right? So if like so now you know in an exponential smoothing with trend or exponential smoothing, right, the first value, right, it's the problem, right? So if they tell you that the first value for period one it's equivalent to this one, right, so if it's not like this in your site, doesn't do this automatically, right, you have to come here and manually type in that value, right, and then you'll see your data will change, right? So now as you can see, if I type 1098, right, you can see now my data changed, right, to account for that value, right? So now, yeah, and then you label everything, right, and then you label your graph, right, and then now let's say now we're doing forecasting using linear regression, right? So you also make sure that your data is selected and you go to QM, then you go to by alphabet, right? And then you go to regression slash trend analysis, right? And then your past number of periods of past data is still gonna be 48. Still gonna be 48, and then you're gonna press OK, right? And then you're gonna get like this, right? So this is your simple linear regression, focus using simple linear regression, right? And then now you have also your what you call your focus for the next period, which is period number 49, and then you have your values that you can use to compare, right? So now you also get your graph, right? So this is what your linear regression graph looks like, right? And then now I think, let me just verify, right? Let's go to QM, right? Yeah, we've done all our different types of forecasts, right? So now after you've done all of the forecasts, right? So now, as I said, so these are your graphs, right? You make sure that they are properly labeled, right? And then now, with regards to what you call, with regards to these values now you now compare, right? Your MAD, MSE, right? So now to make sure that you select the most accurate forecast, right? So what you do is that you look at these values, right? Your MAD, your MSE, your MAP, right? So these values, they are used to calculate the percentage error or the error deviation, like of your forecast, like the difference between your actual value and your forecasted value, right? Which means they determine the what you call how much your focus makes error, right? So that margin of difference, right? So let's say like your forecasted value, let's say your actual value, you forecast the value of 6,000, right? 60, you forecast that you sell 6,000, say 6,000 bottles, right? Then from that 6,000 bottles that you forecasted, right? And then it turns out in actual fact you sell 5,500. So now that's 5,500, right? Is the difference. That's the error in your forecast, right? So that's called a forecast error, right? So these values, the MAD, the MSE, the MAP, the lower they are, right, the more accurate the forecast is because they produce the means that the forecast produce the least amount of forecast errors, right? So now, depending on these values, now you'll conclude on which forecast is more superior, right? And then from that same forecast, that's the forecast that you'll select and you use to make decisions, right? So let's say now they want to ask what's the forecast for product number 49. Let's say if your simple linear regression was the most accurate forecast, right? And then you're gonna conclude that this is your next value for demand, right? So use these values, your bias, MAD, MSE, and your sum of square errors. So like go read up on them and what you call, yeah, go read up on them and then understand like how you use them to make a forecast. But what I can tell is that the lower these values, the more accurate the forecast, right? So yeah, so now from this that I've just done, right? So compare these values and then determine which forecast is more accurate, right? So yeah, I think that's it for this video.